Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Convos podcast, where we get down to the nitty-gritty aspects of student life. We have new main episodes every other Monday and new sub-series episodes on the Wednesdays in between. So be sure to follow us if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify, subscribe if you're watching on YouTube, and be sure to follow us on Instagram at Convos Podcast. Enjoy! Hey everyone, and welcome back to another cafeteria conversation. Today your hosts are me, Kaila, and Maxwell, and we're going to be talking about Artivism, where art meets activism. However, Maxwell and I are not artistic at all in the least bit, so we brought in an expert. Please welcome our special guest, Hannah Flores. She is a spoken word artist, a writer, and a filmmaker, and she's going to talk to us a little bit about her Artivism. So I guess to start us off, Hannah, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. So I am, as Kaila mentioned, a spoken word artist, a writer, a filmmaker, multimedia artist of all different sorts. And I love channeling my work to focus on social justice issues that are relevant in today's society and to bring or to shed light on issues that people don't necessarily talk about enough. And I've been doing this since I was in, I think, 6th grade. So I've been developing everything since then.
Wow, that's cool.
Thanks.
So where did you start? Because I know obviously now you're doing a bunch of different things with your YouTube and your podcast and your films and stuff like that. Where did you start?
Well, yeah, I guess I'd have to go back to 6th grade when I was first introduced to spoken word by my teacher. And I joined the team at my elementary school, and I had so much fun. I made so many new friends, and it really helped me to find my own voice. And that's, I think, why I loved it so much, because I feel like traditional poetry, I never liked how many rules there were. So I love that spoken word gave me that freedom to just sort of write as however I want. And then that went into me continuing it through high school. I joined the school team at our school, and then I eventually became the president or the leader, and we were going around to different competitions across York region, which was a lot of fun. I got to meet other young writers who were aspiring to show their voice to the community as well, and it was a great networking sense, and I hope to inspire other young people to continue showing the world their own voice and their own perspectives as well, however they choose.
Yeah. So I know spoken word is your main focus, but you also do a lot of other things. Maxwell had mentioned it, you have a media productions thing, and you also have a podcast. So I don't know, do you want to talk a little bit about the other things that spoken word has kind of bled into?
Yeah, sure. I think spoken word definitely gave me a platform of some sorts, especially within just showcase my art to other people, but then provide sort of a leg up for other artists around our age to have a platform for themselves. And I remember last year when I was invited on CBC radio to do an interview, and I was a guest. I performed some poetry. That really inspired me to be wow, there's something tangible and accessible that people can have, which is a medium like the radio or broadcasting, where it's easier for people to know other people's stories and to get the word out there. So that's where my inspiration for the podcast came, especially from the whole pandemic situation. I mean, we're all alone at home, so I wanted to build a bigger community and get people talking about things or people engaged. And the media production house is sort of an umbrella for everything that I do, just because I do a lot of different things. So I just wanted it to be one kind of entity, I guess.
That's really cool.
Thank you.
Yeah, so we've heard you, is the proper word for spoken word, is it performing? Is that the right word to be using?
Yeah, you could say that it's a performance art, because I mean, it's one thing to write a poem, but to actually perform it and like breathe life into the words, it doesn't come across the same as if you're reading one of my poems than if I actually perform live in front of you and you're hearing everything and how I say it.
Okay, so we've heard you perform a couple times at our school, and they're amazing. So,
so
good job for that. Yeah, it's really impressive. I don't know if I'd ever be able to do something like that. But what's a bit of like the behind the scenes, the process that goes into like writing one of those poems?
Wow, okay. I think it's sort of like I can't give myself too much structure, or like I can't force myself to write when I'm not in the mood, or like I'm not feeling inspired. So I just kind of have to relax and put the writing away. And I think that's when like some of my best ideas come out, when I'm not focusing on just, oh, okay, I need to get this poem done. I have a deadline. I have this, and there's like so many other things that I need to think about. It's just sort of like it moves through me, and then if it's something that I'm really passionate about and I can sort of put my own spin on how I see things, then that makes the writing process easier. And of course, I'll write it, I'll have like a somewhat final draft, or what I think is a final, even though it's never the final draft. So then I'll constantly be reading it to myself and practicing how I want it to be said. Sometimes I'll read a line incorrectly that I wrote, and then I'll rewrite it the way that I was saying it wrong, because maybe that's just how it naturally feels.
So I know, like, for poetry is not my strong suit by any means, shape, or form, but I really like writing in general. And I know personally, like, when you start out writing, it can be kind of rough and like lots and lots of drafts, and you kind of mentioned that. But do you ever look back on some of like your first poems and you just like the type of growth that you see? Like, does it ever like, I don't know, thoughts of like the growth of where you started versus where you are now? Because I think from an outsider's perspective, like the poems I remember you reading in like grade 9 were like insanely impressive, and the poems you read now are like also insanely impressive. So maybe to me, I don't see the growth as clearly just because I'm not like the actual author. But for you, what kind of growth have you seen?
Thank you. I really appreciate it, but I think, to be honest, I remember I was doing a virtual presentation for an elementary school a couple weeks ago for Black History Month, and I actually showed one of the early videos from a competition that I did in grade 7. And I hadn't seen the video, like I dug it up from my computer file somewhere, and I hadn't watched it in years. And hearing the poem and seeing like a younger version of myself, I was like, what was I doing? Like in comparison to now, I'm like,
Yeah.
where were you trying to go with this? But I think it was sort of like, even at that age, people thought that my writing skills were really impressive, and like they're like, who is this kid? Like we need her on the high school team or something like that. And like then from there, I was sort of like, well, I don't regret anything necessarily, because it got me to the point where I am now, and I appreciate being able to improve. And I don't think my writing is perfect in any way, shape, or form. I feel like I'll always be growing some way. So I'm just grateful for the journey. I guess it's all been amazing.
So you do a lot of other things outside of just reading poems at like our Remembrance Day assemblies, for example. So I'm very unaware, and I would guess to say Maxwell is as well, to the greater community of spoken word poetry. But how do you kind of go about to like finding that community and like figuring out like where to go to grow not only your skills as a writer, but your skills as, I guess, in a sense, a performer as well?
That's a great question. I think I had to do a lot of work on myself as well, just because, I could write the poems, but then how I performed it, did it look like I believed what I was saying? And I wanted that to be like reflected in my work and how I perform. But I think it was just the network of support that I had from my teachers, my family, my friends too. They would listen to me and like give feedback, and I would be like, oh, okay, I need this, and maybe I should say this a little bit differently. And it was sort of like I always had to be like performing in front of people and get comfortable. Like I feel like I was more comfortable performing in front of strangers than people who I knew.
Oh, I feel that.
They were like,
yeah.
you know, I see them every day, and it's like, if I mess up, then they're gonna talk about it tomorrow or whatever. And you know, I think I just kind of had to own it. And I think the fact that there are so many other young poets out there through competitions, at competitions, it never felt like we were competing against each other. It was always like I was rooting for you even if you were on the other team. It was never about the points or whatever. It was your moment with a 3-minute time limit to own the stage and show us who you are. And it takes a lot of vulnerability, so we all empathized with everyone, and we were like, okay, you know, you were very brave to say that, especially like some of the more personal poems, which were obviously very beautiful. It was a great kind of storytelling moment to just be ourselves and make friends, and I have a lot of friends from different schools who are poets as well.
That's cool.
So yeah, we talked about how you transitioned into like using your spoken word poetry for like making like short films and like YouTube videos. What's like the process for making one of those?
Well, obviously I'll start with the poem. I think that's sort of like the frame. I'll never think of a film first. It'll always be the poem, and then I make a film based off of the poem I wrote. And I think it just sort of comes up to matching my words with images that I think reflect what I'm trying to say. And then also, like, with the music, do I want it to have the music be in its own moment, or do I want to overshadow the music? Like, when do I step back and when do I make things shine instead of my voice? Because I think, like, silence sometimes is almost just as powerful as actually saying something. So it's sort of like balancing the give and take, and also finding something that I think will be memorable, or like if there's a photograph that I think is like incredibly beautiful, then maybe I'd want to talk to the owner and work out a way to incorporate their work in my visual aspect. But then the poetry, I feel like with the images, it's sort of like if pictures can paint 1,000 words and then words paint 1,000 pictures, imagine what a video would do. So why not combine the two?
Yeah. You mentioned, like, I know that spoken word, obviously, okay, obviously it's spoken. But what comes with that? Listen, okay, what comes with? I promise I have a point. What comes with the speaking and with any sort of, I guess, oral presentation is kind of figuring out like where to say what to emphasize, where to kind of pull back. And you mentioned like silence, and I know that like a lot of your poems, there's a very nice like rhythmic flow to it. There's a build in how you speak as you try to make a point. And is there like, do you kind of just do what feels natural, or do you kind of like sit down and plan out like here's where I want to do this, like the actual speaking part of the poem? What's kind of the process there?
I think I do have a plan. Like, I'll think of general places where, okay, this word is like, or this line or bar or whatever is like solid, so I want to like shout that as loud as I can. And then there are other parts where I'm like, okay, maybe I should be softer, so that way the next part is like the star of the show. And then or like if I'm going on runs and I have like a lot of rhymes, because not for a lot of my poems, it'll be a series of where I'm not rhyming at all, and then at the end, out of nowhere, I rhyme like 5 lines in a row. So then maybe I'll want to say that faster so it sounds more lyrical, or kind of like rap music, or like a freestyle. And then yeah, it's sort of like I focus on the stylistic aspect, and then also what tone I think the words have, because sometimes if it's more serious, I might want to have a different tone, or if it's like a joke that I'm trying to turn into a specific point, then I might laugh at it, or like the irony of something, and then I will laugh like in the poem. So I think it just depends on what I want the audience to perceive my work as. It's not but also like even when I'm there in the moment and I'm on stage and I feel like at home almost, it kind of just flows naturally, where it's like I'm not thinking about what other people might be thinking about my work. It's just sort of like, I don't know, it's just an extension of me. So I just sometimes I'll scrap the plan entirely and it'll still work out.
You do a really good job with that. Like okay, backstory. When I heard the first time I think I heard your poem was Remembrance Day. And I remember because I was behind the curtain because I was in the choir, right? So I didn't actually know who was saying it because I don't know. I like it was really early on in high school and I didn't really know anyone. And I was sitting there, I was like, I thought for sure it was like some 12th grader, and I was like getting a little bit choked up. I was like, wow, like this person, and then I was like trying to figure out who it was afterwards. So it was like so you convey your emotions so well, and I've heard like, you hear some poems, I guess kind of around Remembrance Day where people kind of read it and it feels very like empty, and you had such a emotion to it, and it felt so like you said, like an extension of you, and I was like sitting there, I was like, wow, like this person is just pouring their heart out completely to an audience full of strangers. Like that's guts to do something like that, especially like at such a young age too. So I don't know, I just thought I'd.
Yeah, so you've been nominated for or your short films have been nominated for awards, is that right? So what's kind of like, how does that stuff happen? Because we're not really like in the community of this. So like, how does that stuff like that happen? How do you get involved with like different organizations and stuff like that?
Okay, well, first of all, I think it just started with the whole YouTube channel thing, and my very first Black History Month video that I made last year, and then that was shared like with people on the school board. But then for my other videos, I have a couple other films that aren't on YouTube because the conditions for a lot of film festivals are that they're not anywhere and they have premiere status, so no one has seen them yet. So I do have some that I might release later, but they're still like, in like judgment phases in different contests. But Film Freeway is my best friend for film competitions. That's basically the go-to kind of pool where any filmmaker can put in their work and submit it to a competition. They can pay the fees for the entrance for the competitions there, and they make a portfolio, and then the judgment can go from there. And that's how a lot of the filmmaking stuff sort of happened, because the organizations need sort of a central place for all the filmmakers to put their stuff. They can't just have random emails from everywhere and people sending random files. So yeah, it's kind of like this big database, or kind of like Indeed or LinkedIn, but for your films.
Oh, that's cool. So, you mentioned something about like some of your poems are still being, or your films are still being held in review. I don't know anything about the competition process, but I don't know, I'm a little curious. Like, I was kind of under the impression that it was like you entered, you go, you perform, or you show what it is that you've made, they judge, and you leave. Is there a lengthier process to it? Or I don't know if you want to share some of the details about entering competition.
Okay, I think a lot of it is kind of like I don't have enough information because I've never like been on that side of the fence where I'm like judging a film. But usually they'll have like a jury of random people who sit like on their film board, or it'll just be people in a public sort of audience setting, and then they'll vote on like which film should be included. And yeah, then it'll have a timeline of when you should submit your film and when you can expect to hear back, like when you submit it. So I'm like, okay, I'll submit it now, and then I'll hear back like May 15th if it moved on to the next round.
Wow.
So yeah, sometimes they'll automatically like just have the competition there, where as soon as you submit it, it's like you won something or you didn't win something. Or they'll have you selected to be part of a festival, because there's competitions, there's festivals that do like virtual events now because everything's like canceled from COVID. But yeah, it'll have like a virtual festival where people can sign up and buy tickets to watch all of the films in their directory. And yeah, then it's sort of like, it's kind of just fun to watch other films too and network with other people who've entered, and like appreciate all the work that other people have done. And yeah, I think it's a really cool community, even though it's virtual. I'd love to be part of like a real film festival, and like I've never actually been to a film festival before in person, so I think that would be exciting.
That's cool.
All right, so this is kind of moving on to like a different thing. It's not as much about like the competition and stuff, but what was it like? What was the response from like peers and people at school when you started doing things like performing your spoken word at school and like making your short films public and stuff?
I think I got like a really positive response. Of course, like I know not everybody's gonna like me, and not everybody's gonna like everything that I do, and I don't like to dwell on things like that. So, I mean, the purpose of me doing this and going up on stage and being vulnerable is because I want to do it. I'm not trying to please anyone, or like I'm not striving for that like a gold sticker or whatever like on my phone. I'm just doing it because it's how I express myself. But then, I'll have people like dislike my YouTube videos, or there'll be a couple people who don't like or aren't interested in it. But I mean, I'm just putting myself out there. If you like it, you like it. If you don't, you don't. And everybody's allowed to like different things. So
yeah, I know. Including like, it's one thing to write a poem about yourself, but we talked in the beginning about this concept of artivism and including these topics of social justice in your work, and just incorporating those different topics. And I wanted to know a little bit more about, I guess that process of like, what topics and stuff do you kind of gravitate towards? How are the different ways that you like to include it beyond just poetry? Because I know you do like, you do other things as well. So just including that, I guess, activism side to your art. What's that like?
Okay, so for the activism part, I always start with connections to my own life or my own experiences, because I feel like that's the place where I sit in that I can speak from. Because I wouldn't want to be the type of person to talk about someone else's experience if I have no personal ties to it, just out of pure respect. Everyone else has their own stories, so I focus on what I know. And then if there's like a controversial topic in the news, or there's an act of injustice somewhere, and I feel that I can reflect on that personally, or like if I identify with an issue in a certain way, then I'll reflect that in my work. So I focus on what I know, like being mixed race, Black, Hispanic, and like living in Canada, being someone who's a young woman of color, stuff like that. That's what I can speak to.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so this is more about like the activism side of things and less of the art. What do you? I know you're very active on Instagram with like activism and sharing news and stuff like that. What do you think about like that whole like I don't want to say like movement, but like transition where social media is becoming a place where people start to use it more to like spread awareness and speak their voice, I guess?
So Instagram, well, first, I think it's important that we have these tools, especially because we can't go out in person, and we're not encouraged to. So it's kind of like we have no other way of telling like a mass group of people about something that's going on. But I do know that there is a very toxic side to social media and activism. I'm not on TikTok. I don't think I ever will like get my own TikTok.
Same.
Like all the TikToks I see are on Instagram and like Reels or IGTV. Yeah, I can't personally deal with TikTok. I think it's too toxic, where there's a lot of positive things, but then to counter that, there's a lot of negativity, and there's a lot of like misinformation being spread. And I don't like. I hope that with the stuff that I post, people will be encouraged to actually look further into it instead of just looking at the post on the surface and not reading the article that it's attached to, or not reading this thing or watching this video and actually understanding what's going on, because I feel like people are so quick to jump on this bandwagon for whatever people are saying. So I'm always careful with what I post, and I make sure that like I look at the sources and see if I trust what's actually being said. And like I'll follow verified accounts of like, you know, CNN or like proper like news stations, stuff like that. So I make sure that not only am I retaining the proper information, but I'm also putting it out there for people to know, and it's not just some random person on the internet being a troll.
Yeah. TikTok, I see, from what I see on my Instagram page, I understand and acknowledge that TikTok does a lot of good things. Like like you said, there's a lot of positivity that come out of it. But like even just on Instagram, I see so much negativity, and I don't think I could deal with it on TikTok as well. Like Instagram, there's so much, I don't want to like toxic positivity almost, I feel like maybe might be the right word. Like there's this big, Max mentioned it a bit, like there's been this big transition to using your Instagram and your platforms to speak out, which is awesome and amazing. And I think it's great that people are doing that. But like you mentioned, like you have so much misinformation being spread that way, and so much people just reading the headline and saying, oh my goodness, this is upsetting me, I have to share everyone. And a lot of like, I know this is a little bit off topic, but like this wave of activism that comes at the expense of guilting people into activism. And I find that like it's so counterproductive, and in a way it makes me really appreciate like genuine activism so much more, when people take the time to like thoroughly look through their sources, thoroughly create a cohesive point that they trust and they understand before just like posting it and just saying like, oh, here's whatever. But yeah, I agree with you on a lot of that stuff.
I think it's also just because like with the whole Black Lives Matter movement, especially like last summer, I actually felt like there was a lot of people saying like, oh, you need to post this, like, can you post something about this, or can you write something about this, or can you do this, can you say something about that? And I was feeling like very anxious and kind of like stuck, to the point where people like wanted me to sort of like solve problems with my Instagram, or like they were like, why aren't you posting this, or like, where are you, like, why haven't you been active the last couple days? And I'm like, excuse me. So yeah, I think it's also like a point to not pressure people to especially if it's something traumatic. I think it's especially like, even though I live in Canada, I don't live in the United States, I don't know what Black American experiences are like. But as like a Black person, to hear those stories, it was still traumatizing. Like I still felt type of way. So I wasn't really adamant about posting all the time, every single day, 24/7. So yeah, I think it's like also the mental health aspect, like how you were saying, on both ends, it can be a lot to process. So I think it's sort of like taking everything in moderation and doing things out of like a good place, where like, is your cup full, can I fill someone else's cup?
Do you think that part of the, because you said like people are kind of expecting you to, I guess, solve their problems, do you think part of that, like just because of how active you are in the fact that like a lot of your art is focused around this sense of activism, do you think people kind of get this idea that like that's what you live and breathe and do, and kind of it's become like your job to educate people? Like do you ever get that sense and that feeling, and like what do you feel if you do?
Yeah, I get that a lot, actually. I think it's sort of like I just need to close the apps and not look at stuff and just be like, you know, I'm going to set a personal boundary to not look at my Instagram for like these certain hours, and I'm going to wait until I feel like I want to respond to stuff. But also, it's kind of like with the creative process, I can't really force myself to write something if I really don't want to. And then it's sort of like my poetry can't be commissioned, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Like, I paint and like I'll draw, and sure, I can paint someone else's dog, I can paint a plant or whatever, I can do that. That's commission work. But when it's really coming from like the bottom of my heart, or it's just coming from like a place, I can't like put a timeline on that or like put a commission on that. I don't know. It doesn't work that way for me.
Yeah.
So I guess we're coming to a close here because we've covered most of what we wanted to cover in this episode. But I just wanted to ask, what's some advice you would want to give to like maybe your younger self, or like someone else who's younger than us trying to get into like the spoken word like community and stuff like that?
I'd say definitely just start writing. I feel like there's no better definition for like a writer or a spoken word artist than someone who writes and someone who just starts performing. So like, keep writing about things that you're really passionate about and do it for yourself first, and then see what becomes of it afterwards. So, if you don't have a spoken word club at your school, start one, find a teacher advisor, and get a group of people who are interested in writing, but maybe not necessarily, they don't know enough about spoken word. I'm sure they'll grow to like it because there's so much freedom with it. And then, YouTube is out there. Go on YouTube and put like a video out there of you reading a poem. It doesn't have to be anything fancy, but just to share it. And because stories and poems like that are supposed to be shared. So, even if it's just like one person sees it, one person was impacted just from your words, and then you can sort of go on a journey from there and see how you want your spoken word journey to be. There's no like template for it.
Mm-hmm. So just before we close out, I guess out of curiosity, if you can share if you have any other like big upcoming plans. I know like we're graduating this year, so if you want to talk a little bit about maybe what you plan to do post-secondary or just personal projects, anything you're willing to share.
Yeah, I'm excited. Hopefully, like, when the pandemic is kind of died down, I'll get to move in and go downtown to UT for school. That would be great.
Yeah.
So I'm really happy about that. I'm thinking of maybe double majoring in a science and something that focuses on like the social or economic determinants of health. So maybe like international relations, global health, environment. Health and the environment. And yeah, another big project that I'm really excited about is through the City of Toronto and Artworks TO. I'm coordinating like a film project that's going to include Black and Indigenous Canadian artists. So we're all going to be doing a lot of poetry, and there's filmmakers included as well. So it'll be like poetry over film, and hopefully, fingers crossed, when everyone gets their vaccines and the pandemic is kind of, not really a thing anymore, it'll be screened in person and not virtually.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I hope so too.
So Hannah, thank you so much for joining us on our podcast and being a guest. It was an honor to be able to interview you or not interview, but have a conversation with you about like your work and what you do. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me. I love the podcast. Everyone, please subscribe and watch it.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, you can check out Hannah's Instagram and YouTube, both under the name Hannah Flores the Poet. They'll be linked in the description down below. If you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, make sure to drop a follow. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure to hit that like button and hit the big red subscribe button right below it. Make sure to check us out on Instagram at the CAF Convos Podcast, and we'll see you next episode.